My stepkids said, "You're an outsider. This isn't your family." That evening, I canceled their vacation payments and cut off their allowance. Their reaction was priceless. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now, let's get started. You're not our real dad. Stop pretending. I still remember the first time Chris said those words, though it came years after I had already given him everything a man could give. At the time, it cut through me like glass, but to understand why, you need to know what came before. How I stepped into a house that was never mine and tried, foolishly, to build something solid out of shadows. 8 years ago, I married Lisa. I knew from the beginning it wasn't just her I was saying yes to. She had 2 children. Chris, 12 then, all restless energy and teenage scorn, and Molly, 9, still soft around the edges, still innocent enough to draw hearts and flowers on scrap paper. Their father, David, lived in another city. He was the kind of man who breezed in like a gust of wind, scattering promises and gifts before disappearing again. A brand new phone for Chris, a sparkly bracelet for Molly, and words. "I'll come next month, we'll go on that trip. I'll help with school. I promise." Always promises. Rarely anything real. I never tried to erase him. I didn't walk in with the arrogance of thinking I could be dad. Instead, I told myself, just be here. Show up. Do the work. If David wanted to play the magician, I would be the carpenter. Unseen, steady, building things that actually lasted. It began in small ways. Picking them up after school when Lisa's shift ran late. Sitting in the bleachers during Chris's soccer practices. Clapping even when the field was cold and muddy. Waiting in pediatric waiting rooms with Molly. Holding her hand when the doctor said she needed antibiotics again. Driving them back and forth to friends' houses. Their chatter filling the car. Their arguments slicing through the air like only siblings can. None of it glamorous, none of it noticeable. But it was the fabric of daily life, and I wove myself into it one thread at a time. I worked longer hours at the firm to make sure there was money for school trips, for Molly's piano lessons, for Chris's sports gear. Sometimes it meant giving up weekends I wanted for myself. Sometimes it meant denying vacations Lisa longed for. But I told myself this was worth it. That building their future would make them feel safe in a way that gifts and empty promises never could. And slowly, so slowly I hardly noticed at first, signs of acceptance began to show. One evening Molly left a card on my desk. Folded notebook paper, edges uneven, words written in colored marker. "Thank you for being here." I stared at it for a long time, longer than I should have, because no one had ever written words like that for me before. I had grown up in a house where gratitude was rare, where silence was the only recognition you got for surviving. That small card was more than paper. It was a doorway into something I thought I'd never have. Chris was harder. He carried David's shadow inside him, even when his father wasn't around. But there were nights when he let the armor drop. Late evenings after a game, sitting in the car while the windows fogged from our breaths, he would talk about his plans. College, careers, the kind of car he wanted to drive one day. I would listen, adding small words of encouragement, never pushing, never claiming more than he gave. Those talks felt like trust. They felt like progress. Lisa noticed too. Sometimes she would squeeze my hand at night and whisper, "They're lucky to have you." She didn't say it often, but when she did, I held on to those words like lifelines. That was when I began saving. Not just the usual rainy day money. No, something bigger, something sacred. Every bonus, every extra shift, every dollar I could scrape beyond the bills went into an account with their names written on it in my mind. A future fund. A shield against the same instability I had grown up with. I told myself, they won't know hunger. They won't know eviction. They won't know what it means to dream and then watch that dream wither because money said no. It wasn't easy. There were nights I sat in my car after work, too exhausted to turn the key, wondering how long I could keep this pace. There were arguments with Lisa about why we couldn't go on certain trips, why the house renovations had to wait, why I wouldn't buy a new car for myself even though the old one coughed smoke on cold mornings. She didn't always understand, but she tolerated it. She knew my childhood had been all broken promises and debt collectors, and maybe she thought my obsession with saving was just my way of healing old wounds. Maybe it was. But in those years, I believed I was building something unshakable. Birthdays were proof. Molly once stood up during her 10th birthday, cheeks flushed with sugar and excitement, and told her friends, "Thomas always makes the best cakes." She didn't say stepdad. She just said my name, plain and proud, as if I belonged there. Chris once introduced me to his coach as my dad without hesitation, and though I knew it was just easier than explaining, it still landed like a victory. At night, when the house finally fell quiet, I would look at their sleeping faces and tell myself I had done it. That against the odds, against the ghost of a father who dropped in and out, I had carved a place for myself. Not perfect, not complete, but real. That's why I saved. That's why I endured. That's why I wore down the edges of myself until all that remained was reliability. Because I thought, no, I believed that reliability was enough. But illusions are like glass. They shine when the light hits them right. They look solid. And then one day, without warning, they shatter. And when they do, all that remains are the sharp edges, cutting deeper than anything you could have prepared for. It began with a shadow. David's return was not sudden, not dramatic. It was slower, like a disease creeping back into the body after years of remission. He started showing up at milestones: Chris's graduation from high school, Molly's piano recital, slipping into the picture like he had always been there. The children's eyes lit up in ways I hadn't seen in years, as if they had been starving for him all along. He came bearing gifts, of course. Always gifts. An expensive wristwatch for Chris, delivered in a velvet box with the flourish of a magician. A gold charm bracelet for Molly, so heavy it clinked with every movement. He didn't ask about the nights I had stayed awake with her when fevers shook her small body, or the weeks I spent driving Chris to practices through rain and snow. No, he just placed a box on the table, leaned back with that easy grin, and let their gratitude wash over him. And Lisa let it happen. She watched from her chair, silent, her lips pressed into a line, as if she were both ashamed and relieved. I told myself it didn't matter. Stay in your lane, I whispered to myself. You're not their father. You're just the man who shows up. But every gift David dropped on their laps was a stone thrown against the wall I had spent years building. I could see the cracks forming. Chris especially was drawn to him. He leaned into David's stories, the half-true tales of business trips, of adventures in cities he never named, of promises that sounded like music to a boy who wanted shortcuts. He began calling him Dad again, the word slipping easily from his tongue, as though it had been waiting there all along, buried beneath resentment, waiting for the right moment to resurface. I watched. I swallowed it. But inside, I felt myself shrinking, fading into the background of a life I had built with my bare hands. The breaking point came at dinner. It was a Wednesday evening, ordinary until it wasn't. I had spent the week calculating vacation plans, looking at camp schedules, trying to piece together a summer that would give the kids structure, memories, opportunities. I had already filed the forms, already set aside the money. All that remained was to tell them. We sat at the table, Lisa across from me, Chris and Molly between us. I laid out the papers carefully, my voice steady. So here's the plan. I've already covered the camp deposits, and I thought we'd take a family trip in July, maybe the coast this year. I expected at least a nod, maybe even gratitude. Instead, Chris leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and smirked in a way that didn't belong to him. It belonged to David. And then he said it. You're an outsider. This isn't your family. The words were sharp, clean, deliberate. They didn't stumble out of him. They were delivered like a verdict. Molly didn't speak, but she looked at him, then at me and slowly nodded. Lisa said nothing. She lowered her eyes, her silence a knife twisting deeper than any word could. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 8 years of sacrifice, 8 years of showing up, 8 years of believing reliability mattered, and it was all erased in an instant. I sat there with my carefully planned papers, my voice caught in my throat, and I realized I had been replaced. Not by love, not by presence, but by a man who had done nothing except show up at the right moment with glittering gifts and empty promises. My hands trembled as I gathered the papers back into a neat stack. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't beg for recognition. I simply folded the plans, placed them back in my folder, and set them aside. That night, after the table was cleared, I walked into my office and canceled everything. The vacation, the camp deposits, the allowances. Every plan I had made for their summer vanished with the click of a mouse. The next morning, I told them flatly, there will be no vacation, no camp, no allowance this summer. The reaction was immediate: shock, anger, disbelief. Molly's voice rose first. But you already paid. You promised. Chris slammed his hand against the table. You can't do that. You can't just cancel everything like that. And Lisa, her face pale, her lips pressed together, finally found words. Thomas, please, don't punish them for what they said. I looked at her, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. If I'm an outsider, then let their family, the one they recognize, pay for their summer. Let David cover it. Let him prove he's more than a gift giver. If I'm not part of this family, then neither is my money. Their faces twisted with disbelief, as if the ground had shifted beneath them. For years, they had grown used to my quiet giving, my endless patience, my sacrifices made without complaint. They had assumed I would always keep paying, no matter what words they threw at me. That evening, the house was heavy with silence. No laughter, no chatter, no thank yous or good nights. Just the quiet weight of a truth none of them wanted to face. That words have consequences, and sometimes the man they dismissed as nobody finally decides to live as if they were right. I sat alone in my office, the folder of canceled plans in front of me, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to clarity. Not peace, not victory, just clarity. If they wanted David, then David could pay. If they wanted me to be an outsider, then I would step fully into that role. The summer would be theirs to navigate without me. And maybe, just maybe, they would learn what my presence had truly meant. When the words left Chris's mouth, "You're an outsider. This isn't your family," something inside me snapped. Not in an explosion, not in rage, but in the quiet way a rope finally gives after years of strain. That night, when the house had gone silent, I sat in the office with the bank statements spread out before me. Numbers, lines, payments, all the invisible threads that held their lives together. Every school fee, every piano lesson, every soccer trip, every allowance card. All of it ran through me. I stared at those pages until the truth crystallized. If they saw me as a stranger, then my money had no place in their lives either. I poured a glass of whiskey, opened the laptop, and made my decision. The first step was the joint account. For years it had been a quiet reservoir, tens of thousands tucked away, built from extra hours, denied luxuries, postponed vacations. I had imagined it funding Chris's college, Molly's first apartment, maybe even a down payment one day when they were ready. Now, I watched my hands move steadily, almost calmly, as I transferred every dollar into an account with only my name on it. Within minutes, the lifeline they had assumed eternal was severed. The second step was boundaries. Lisa had always spoken of us as a unit. We'll figure it out. We'll cover it. The kids know we're here. But when Chris declared me an outsider, she said nothing. Silence can be worse than betrayal. So I told her that night with the calmness of a man who had decided. From now on, responsibility for the kids belongs to you and David, not me. If they see me as a stranger, then I'll act like one. Her face paled. She whispered, Thomas, please, they don't mean it. They said it, I replied, and you didn't correct them, so now I'm believing them. The fallout came faster than even I expected. Within days, Chris discovered his internship trip was canceled. The payment hadn't gone through. He stormed into the kitchen, phone in hand, shouting about mistakes in the system. I looked him straight in the eye. Not a mistake. Ask your father. Molly was next. Her summer course, something she had begged for, came to a halt. The invoice arrived, unpaid. She tried to hide it at first, hoping maybe I'd notice and fix it quietly like always. But when the emails piled up, she finally came to me, voice trembling. "They're saying I can't attend unless I pay this week." I didn't flinch. "Then talk to your dad." Their shock was almost beautiful in its rawness. They had grown used to the invisible safety net, the assurance that no matter what, I would step in. Now the net was gone, and they were dangling in the open air. David, of course, promised everything. When Chris called him in a panic, he said, "Don't worry, son. I'll cover it." When Molly pleaded, he assured her he'd take care of it. But promises were all he knew how to give. Days turned into weeks, and not a cent appeared. The children learned what I had known for years, that David's word was as empty as his visits. And so the blame shifted. They began messaging me, not with gratitude, not with humility, but with accusations. Chris's words cut through the screen. "You betrayed us. You ruined my summer. You're destroying my future." Molly, softer but no less accusing. "I thought you cared. How could you do this to me?" Lisa tried to intervene. Late at night, she sat beside me on the couch, her voice low. "Thomas, they're just kids. They don't understand how much you've done. Can't you just—" "No," I said. My tone was ice. "If I'm a stranger, then my money is a stranger too." She stared at me as if she didn't recognize me, as if the man who had carried this family for 8 years had vanished overnight. But the truth is, he hadn't vanished. He had simply stopped being used. The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling. Chris scrambled to find alternatives. He applied for part-time jobs, his arrogance cracked by the weight of bills he couldn't dodge. He came home one evening, uniform reeking of grease from a fast food chain, slamming the door in silence. Molly learned to budget, to stretch allowance from friends, to save from babysitting gigs. She stopped asking for extras, stopped assuming that Thomas will handle it. I watched all of it with a cold detachment. Not joy, not satisfaction. Just the quiet knowledge that life was teaching them lessons my words never could. Lisa, caught between them and me, began to bend. One night, she whispered what I had waited years to hear. "You were the only one who ever cared for them. David never did." I see it now. But by then, her words felt like ashes. Recognition delayed is recognition denied. Still, I didn't relent. I didn't return the money. I didn't fund the courses. I didn't rescue Chris from his job or Molly from her scrimping. I let them face the silence, the absence, the consequences. Because sometimes the most powerful answer isn't spoken. Sometimes the lesson is not in giving, but in taking away. The silence came first. After the shouting, the accusations, the slammed doors, the phone calls that ended in curses or tears, there was only silence. It settled over the house like dust, thick and unmoving. Chris sulked in his room, speaking only when necessity demanded. Molly avoided me, slipping past in hallways, her footsteps light as if she feared to disturb me. And Lisa, she moved through the days like a woman haunted, caught between anger at me and disappointment in them. It was a silence heavy with meaning. At first, they resisted. Chris cursed me openly, called me a traitor, told his mother that I was destroying his future. He slammed his phone on the counter one night and shouted, "If Dad were here, he'd never let this happen." Lisa said nothing, and I just stared at him until his voice faltered. He knew the truth. David wasn't there. David never would be. Molly's rebellion was softer. She wrote me notes instead of speaking. "Please," scribbled on scraps of paper. "Please, Thomas. Just this one time. I'll do better." When I found them on my desk, I didn't reply. I left them folded, untouched, until she stopped writing. And slowly the silence grew. I thought it would break me. I thought the absence of their voices, their laughter, their careless thank yous, would hollow me out. Instead, it clarified me. I realized that silence wasn't punishment. It was space. Space for them to feel the weight of choices. For me to breathe without carrying their contempt. Weeks passed, and life rearranged itself. Chris, once proud of his father's promises, learned the taste of humiliation at his part-time job. He came home with grease-stained uniforms, his hands raw from scrubbing, his pride swallowed. I watched him toss his sneakers in the corner, collapse into bed without words. He never complained, not to me, but the silence said enough. Molly adjusted too. She learned to save every dollar she earned from babysitting, to patch old clothes instead of buying new ones, to make choices she never had to face before. I saw her handwriting change, lists, calculations, careful notes in the margins of schoolwork where she tracked what she could afford. She didn't ask me for help. She didn't expect it anymore. That too was a lesson. Lisa saw it all. One evening, after Chris had gone to bed and Molly was curled up on the couch with her notebook, she turned to me. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "You were the only one who ever carried them. David never did. I see that now." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Her silence at the dinner table had already spoken louder than any apology. Recognition delayed is recognition denied. But life has a way of grinding even the proudest hearts down into understanding. Months passed. The summer ended, and Chris returned to school with tired eyes but new habits. He worked shifts between classes, spent less on frivolities, spoke more carefully. Molly grew sharper, more self-reliant. Her innocence burned away by necessity. They had learned what money meant when it didn't come easily, what stability cost when the one who provided it finally stepped back. And then came the moment I never expected. It was late autumn when Chris knocked on my office door. I looked up surprised. He rarely sought me out. He stood there awkwardly, a photograph in his hand. "I wanted to give you this," he muttered. I took it from him. It was from his course graduation, the one he had struggled to afford on his own. In the picture, he stood in front of a banner, his smile tight but real, his hands gripping the certificate he had earned without my money. "I worked for it," he said. His voice cracked, just slightly. "I thought you should have it." For a long moment I couldn't speak. My fingers traced the edge of the photo. It wasn't gratitude, not in words. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something else. A recognition, however fragile, that what I had done forced him to grow. I placed the photo into a folder on my desk, the same folder where, years ago, I had kept their college fund plans. A folder that once held my dreams for their future now held proof of a lesson learned the hard way. Not every lesson needs words. Sometimes the silence is the teacher. Sometimes withholding is the only way to show what giving once meant. Lisa still looks at me differently now. Sometimes I catch her watching me with regret, as if wishing she had defended me sooner. But I don't need her words. I don't need their apologies. What I needed all along was respect. And respect was finally beginning to grow, not in declarations, not in names, but in actions. Chris worked. Molly saved. Lisa admitted the truth. And I learned at last the power of saying no. The house is quieter now. Not the suffocating silence of betrayal, but the measured calm of boundaries understood. There are no more illusions, no more games where I play father while another man is worshipped for showing up with trinkets. There is only reality. That I am not their father, but I was the one who cared. And sometimes caring means walking away from the table, letting silence do the talking. I keep that photo close, not because it redeems the pain, not because it erases the words that cut me apart, but because it reminds me of the truth I finally accepted. The best lessons are not taught through endless giving. They are carved in the absence, in the quiet, in the refusal to be used. So now I ask you, was I wrong? Was it cruelty to pull away, to let them stumble, to let silence speak where my voice had failed? Or was it the only way to show them what love without respect really becomes?